Continuing Trews Politics Week, we're going to analyse the Greens a little bit, because you know what? All the time people go to me, Russell, the Greens agree with you and your policies, although my policies aren't actually my policies, they're just things that I've read on bits of paper. E.g., demand the US closes Guantanamo Bay. The Greens care about that. Abolish tuition fees. Obviously we think that, the Greens think it too. Scrap Trident. We think it, the Greens think it. Don't privatise the NHS no more. End that idea. There should be no profit out of the NHS. Of course we agree with that. So because we agree with the Greens on so much, and there is sort of an election coming, we decided on Trews Politics Week to talk to the most significant figures in the Green Party, Caroline Lucas and Natalie Bennett. Here is that happening now. Hello, welcome to the Trews. I'm with Caroline Lucas, the Green MP who is running for Parliament. You're already in Parliament.
Yeah, you have to stop being in Parliament when they stop for the election, so I'm not an MP anymore.
So you've got no power at all?
Not for the next few weeks, but I'm hopeful that come May the 7th I'll be re-elected.
So you know me with my there's no point voting type stance I have. The reason that I have that, Caroline, because I know that you're like the real deal and sort of green and common and campaign for nuclear disarmament and a legitimate person who cares as well as being a decent human being. All of my fears and not apathy, but I heard the phrase reflexive impotence, like a sense of this doesn't do anything, comes from the fact that I feel like a lot of people that the country is really run by these unelected interests that are behind the powerful. And when you see things like that HSBC stuff happen, when you see no bankers going to prison for Libor and all of the sort of the financial world scandals that seem to primarily impact ordinary British people, it sort of infuses us with this sense of not apathy, but just learned indifference to the process. So, but you, as someone who obviously believes in it because you are in Parliament, you are an MP, how do you address us?
Lots of the reasons that the bankers have power or the other unelected people have power is because politicians have given that power away. You know, it's not like some divine right that these other people have power. Politicians have chosen to give that power away. And you know that Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership Agreement. This is a really wicked agreement that's going to give even more power to corporations. You've got politicians right now negotiating that away, saying, yeah, go on, set up a separate court system whereby private corporations can take democratically elected governments to court if they happen to think that one of those laws is a barrier to trade. This isn't happening just because the companies are bad, although many of them are. It's happening because politicians are perfectly happy to pass away that power. I think one of the problems is that those bigger international institutions are completely undemocratic. Things like the World Bank or even the World Trade Organization, even the EU, we want to have the democracy back to the members of the European Parliament, not with the unelected Commission, who currently have far more powers than anybody else. So sometimes it's absolutely right to have decisions made at a European level, let's say on climate change. You know, we need to have that kind of global agreement that the EU can play a key role in. But all of the institutions have to be democratic and accountable to us, the people, and that's what's missing at the moment.
That's what happens. Typically these sort of federations or alliances, confederacies set up across the world, and then they're primarily accountable to corporate interests rather than human interests.
Exactly, I get it.
Right. When you read something like, under the Tories 5,000 NHS nurses have lost their job, I don't think you'd be hard pushed to find a person who would go, yeah, let's get rid of 5,000 NHS nurses. So that's happened. You know what I mean? So it induces this odd sort of sense of impotence.
Well, I think is when we're talking about media reform, there's a circle here. We have a right-wing media that tells people, that supports right-wing politics.
Yeah.
What we need, we can do with vehicles like this, we can get out and reach people, but we also need to break up those big forces in the media.
Yeah, and that can be done sort of through legislation. What about another thing that I suppose people care a lot about is the continued privatisation of the NHS and the transference of community-owned assets to the private sector. Is that something that similarly can be prevented by legislation?
Very much so. I mean, Caroline Lucas, the Green MP, put the NHS reinstatement bill before the last Parliament that said no private profit in the NHS. Just draw a line and say that's not allowed.
All the other parties right now are obsessed on getting the deficit down at all costs, and what they're talking about, like the Tories are saying that they're going to have another £12 billion of cuts to welfare. That is an appalling idea. We know that some of the most vulnerable people are being really pushed over the edge right now by the kinds of policies around the bedroom tax and cuts to housing benefit and so on. The best way out of the deficit isn't by constantly slashing people's jobs, it's by investing in jobs, so you get people's taxes going back into the revenue. So what we want to do is turn this around, properly invest in affordable housing, properly invest in making every home energy efficient. That last one would also mean that we could tackle climate change, we could get people's fuel bills down in their homes, and we could create hundreds of thousands of jobs.
Ban the sales of arms to anti-democratic and authoritarian regimes. Because like, one of the things we sort of say in the Trews is, what's the point in having like a human rights abusers list and then selling them guns? These people are human rights abusers. Which of you wants guns? It's nuts, isn't it?
It's completely nuts. And we got into the Excel Centre the other day, where they have the biggest arms fair in the whole of Europe. And even just someone like me who doesn't know that much about this stuff, we were able to find people selling stuff that absolutely is illegal. So we were able to get that shut down. So that was good.
The only times I've ever seen you, Natalie, is when we've been, like, I've seen you at Occupy in Parliament Square talking to only, like, about, I was there as well, talking to about 50 people. I see you at, like, People's Assembly thing. What are your feelings about the significance of grassroots activism and those kind of movements?
That's absolutely vital, and I see the Green Party really as there's a representation of that in the broader stream, in the mainstream. And we need the stronger those movements are, the more people there are involved in that. Whether it's people, 10 people sitting in the local village hall trying to organise something, or 1,000 people in the East End of London. Yeah. All of those things are force, are powers, are pushing for change.
It's more like that democracy is something for every day, not twice a decade.
Yeah, I say politics should be something you do. At the moment, most people have it done to them.
I've sort of said before, like, after a revolution, the Greens are the very kind of people you'd want in charge of running things, not like a narcissistic lunatic like myself. You'd have sensible people with sensible policies. Yeah. But the problem is that as long as we have sort of a first-past-the-post electoral system, the Greens are never going to be significantly represented in Parliament.
Well, they're certainly not going to be represented enough. We know that when there is a fairer voting system, like in the European elections, over 1 million people voted Green, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Right now, under first past the post, it is harder, but nonetheless, a strong Green vote still sends a really strong message.
Why is there such reluctance to alter first past the post from parties like the Conservative Party?
Well, the problem is you've got to get the turkeys to vote for Christmas.
Right.
You have to get the MPs sitting there in their safe seats to say, yes, I'm going to vote not to have a safe seat anymore. But if you have enough of a push from civil society, enough of a drive from people saying, we want change, we've got to have change. And if you look at Westminster, the last significant reform in Westminster was women getting a vote. That was in 1918. We're about to hit the centenary. It's about time we changed something. We changed everything in Westminster.
The best way to keep the Tories out of Brighton is to vote Green. We're ahead of all the other parties. And also, crucially, if we keep that Green voice in Parliament, then what we can do is, I would certainly never support the Conservatives, but what I would do is support a minority Labour government on a case-by-case basis to push them to be the party that most Labour supporters would like them to be. So, for example, why is the Labour front bench still committed to spending £100 billion on Trident nuclear weapons? What an obscene waste of money. If we had some progressive MPs pushing them from the left, I think we could make some change.
Obviously, you as a leader of the Green Party want people to vote for you, but it seems like more significant than people voting for you at this election will be significant electoral reform and some form of proportional representation so that you could have a meaningful Green presence in a completely revised establishment.
Exactly, and what we're calling for is a People's Constitutional Convention. Get a representative group of people from around the country, start with a blank sheet of paper, and say,
right, you, blank sheet of paper, what do you want? Nothing! Get out! Go and get some people.
Well, exactly, get the people, have a big national conversation with, on the internet, through all of the social media. Everyone can feed into that process.
Yeah, that's one of the things I think, Natalie, is it's almost like that sort of politics is conducted under this kind of sort of ludicrous pretense that we don't live in this social media driven intercommunicative world. People that live in Brighton Pavilion should definitely vote for you.
They should, please.
Are you a person that lives in Brighton Pavilion? If you are, you should definitely vote for this person, Caroline Lucas. When you meet Caroline Lucas and Natalie Bennett, what you're struck by is these are obviously decent people. These are not, it's like the opposite of what I imagine it's like to meet David Cameron and what I know it's like to meet Nigel Farage. These people are working for the unelected interests that control this country. Big business, the financial industry, transnational corporations, big trade agreements, bodies like the WTO and the IMF, which I think are to do with wrestling. Whereas with Natalie Bennett and Caroline Lucas, you think these are the very kind of people that you want involved in administration and organisation. But by their own admission, with a first past the post electoral system, you're never going to have significant Green representation, because politics and the election is set up not to represent people's wishes. In most cases, it don't matter if you vote Green, you ain't getting Green. In Brighton Pavilion, evidently voting Green has real meaning. So what we're learning is, and what we've said for a while in some senses, is it's the system itself that's problematic. Even when you have decent people with decent ideas, getting those people into a position where they can legislate for those ideas, make real change, challenge the interests of the powerful, that's a really challenging, difficult, near on impossible thing to do due to systemic problems. So over Trews Politics Weeks, we'll continue to learn about that, and we'll report to you as we do. Subscribe here.
Nose is a tool that is abused to fool you and to leave you scared and confused. Trews is like the nose. If the nose was true, I want some Trews. Let's have some Trews.